This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am Kevin Randle. I was going to do a rant here about a new book about the Alamo, which takes us off in a different direction. I was thinking about it only because we talked about Davy Crockett on this program in the past and some of the attacks on him. And this one is suggesting that the Texas War for Independence was actually fought over slavery. Now it's all racially motivated. For 100 years, we heard about how the Texas War of Independence was fought over the issue of land. Now we've moved into a different arena. I just thought I'd mention that. I don't believe any of that. I think the Texas War of Independence was fought because the Mexican government refused to give statehood to the state of Texas. That's what they wanted, and it evolved into the Texas War for Independence from that point. There's more on my blog about that. Just plug in Davy Crockett, that sort of thing, and you can read some of those thoughts on that. I just wanted to mention that because everything has become racially motivated these days, and I just am tired of that. I'm joined now by John GREENEWALD, whom has been on the program a number of times, and he is in California. He's a producer, writer, known for Unsealed Conspiracy Files and the National Geographic Hitler and the Occult and Secrets of the Freemasons. He is best known as a creator of the Black Vault, a website that houses thousands, probably millions of UFO-related documents obtained through FOIA from dozens of government agencies. He has been the master of ceremonies at many UFO-related conferences and symposiums, and is one of the leaders in the UFO community. And his new book, which I have right here, well, that's not that new, but his book is Inside the Black Vault, which is the government's UFO secrets revealed. John, welcome to A Different Perspective.
I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you. It's good to be back. Always fun to be here with you.
Yeah, we have a good time when we know stuff about UFOs, so that's kind of
that's
fun.
Right.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you again is this Hottel memo. You just got an unredacted version of it, I guess, that you pushed up on the Black Vault. Tell us a little bit about the Hottel memo, what it's about, and what the unredacted version revealed to you.
Sure. So this memo itself was not new in the sense that it's been around for quite some time. It talks about, and I wanted to pull it up to make sure I accurately quoted it, but it was March 22nd, 1950 when this memo was written. It was by Guy Hottel or Hottel. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but essentially he was the special agent in charge for the Washington, D.C. office. And he had written this memorandum to J. Edgar Hoover, and he had relayed information about flying saucers and flying discs. And in it, which is kind of what piques everybody's interest, he says, an investigator for the Air Force has stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular and shaped, with raised centers approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner familiar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. So it obviously has piqued everybody's interest, but for years, for decades since this had come out, the names of the informant and where this information came from was redacted. You could read everything else. So a while back, I had filed a case with the FBI to try and get those redactions lifted. This is a lesson that after 26 years of using FOIA and 10,000 cases, I still surprise myself in that you can think something's going to happen and be sure it is, meaning I thought it would be denied, and the opposite happened, where they actually lifted the redactions and everything was released in full. and it revealed that the information came from a Special Agent R.H. Kurtzman. I've looked him up. I found him in other records, including what the FBI calls their dead list. That is not a nickname. That's really what they call it. It's a list of dead people that the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act office uses to cross-reference. So somewhere in the past, maybe somebody requested his file. Kurtzman, I found him. He exists. Obviously passed away, but I did find references to him. But the information that was relayed to the special agent was from a Carl Howe. He was part of the sex squad for the Metropolitan Police Department, which I think I can safely assume would be Washington, D.C., where this memo was written. So the information goes somehow to this sex squad member, is then relayed to the special agent in D.C., then it goes to the special agent in charge, Guy Hottel, and then he sends it on to J. Edgar Hoover. And here we have this memo that will forever live in UFO legend and lore till the end of time. So that's the background of the memo.
What's the date on the memo?
March 22nd, 1950. So you're a couple years out from the Roswell story.
But what I'm thinking here is we're talking about the 3 crash discs.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me of Behind the Flying Saucers, which was published in 1950. And there was a Time magazine article, I think it's January 16th, 1950, that related to Behind the Flying Saucers and gave some of this information. So I wondered if that wasn't the ultimate source of this information that went to Hottel.
Yeah, there's definitely around this era a lot of rumors that were going around, and you have and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the con man around this time. I just did a video
Silas Newton.
Yes, thank you. I was drawing a blank on his name with reading all the special agent and agent names. But so you have Silas Newton floating around. And to be honest with you, when I had filed the MDR case to get this reviewed, I thought that Newton's name was going to come up. And so what I did in this video, which is on the Black Vault's YouTube channel, if anybody's curious to watch it, but what I do is I break down Silas Newton's FBI file as well, which I had gone after. And in it was his rap sheet. And in there was kind of nowhere was he in trouble in D.C. He was arrested and charged with quite a few different things. Some he got off on, others he was obviously convicted, but nothing in D.C. So a lot of the theories that started to go around with this sex squad member from the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department was it Newton was their source? And for me, it kind of doesn't look like that. So then was it somebody else that was either reading these types of books, getting caught up in these stories, getting again, the information from Silas Newton and crowd, who knows? But it was kind of interesting that it was that department from the Metropolitan Police Department that somehow came up with this information and forwarded it on. One last note. Mm-hmm.
You said you've assumed it's the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police.
Correct.
What if it was the Denver Metropolitan Police?
Well, the reason why I would say that is if a Metro PD in whatever city, if they feel that there should be federal involvement, they'll go to their local field office versus somewhere else. So if they, if it was Denver, if they kind of jumped and went to FBI headquarters, it wouldn't have gone to Guy Hottel. See what I mean? So I think that Metro PD probably went to the local field office in D.C. That agent Kurtzman then said, okay, this is something that should be passed up the chain. Following that protocol, he would go to the special agent in charge. Hottel was in charge of the whole office in D.C., and then he evaluates the information and says, yep, Hoover, the director of the FBI, needs to know this, and that's what the memo is. Now, the
reason I brought up Denver is because in March of 1950, your pal Silas Newton gave a lecture at the University of Denver. And we're right in that time frame where he's making all kinds of public statements, and there's a big controversy about it, and people are looking for him and wondering what he said in Denver. All coming out about the time of Behind the Flying Saucers is being released, and that article from Time magazine. So the reason I jumped to Denver as opposed to anywhere else is because of that lecture that Newton had given in Denver at that time.
Yeah, I didn't dig that up. Obviously, you knew it because you're like an encyclopedia with a lot of this stuff. But somebody on my channel had commented about that lecture, and I was unaware of it. But I still think that the way that the FBI would work around this time, it would probably be the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. And I reached out to them when I first got this a couple weeks ago and asked them where, if they still have them, files from the 1950s would be, because there are state sunshine laws, not as popular as the Freedom of Information Act, but the states have generally a comparable law that they call the Sunshine Laws. Some of them call them the Freedom of Information Act as well. But these Sunshine Laws allow you to access state level records versus federal. So I feel that I've exhausted the federal level. I have everything. I've got Guy Hottel's FBI file, which they claim is only this memo, the file for Silas Newton and so on. But the Metropolitan Police Department on that side, what did they do to investigate this? And that's what I'm curious about. This could very well be all rooted to Silas Newton and all the hoaxes at the time. That's fine. But I'm fascinated to what did they do at the time? Because they reference.
Let me interrupt, John. I have to interrupt you because I'm going to have to take a break. But this is going a little bit deeper than I thought we would go, because there's so many interesting connections. I've got more information about Silas Newton and that sort of thing in the Hottel memo on my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. John is, of course, at www.theblackvault.com, the Black Vault, all being lowercase, all being run together. And when we get back, we'll discuss this a little bit further and see if we can nail down some of the information. So for those of you, stick around. We'll be right back after this. And we are back. I think you all can see that we're doing our proper social distancing here, because John is nowhere near me here and he's in a different environment, as you can see. When we went away, we were kind of following up on some of this Hottel memo stuff. And I'm wondering, again, and you might know more about this than I do, of course, is it seemed that Hoover had an interest in UFOs. And there's a number of memos about that we've seen over the years, including the one that everybody thought pointed to Roswell that I think reports to the Shreveport incident. But I'm wondering if there might not have been a special chain of command for UFO-related material in 1950 that would have jumped from the local office in Denver, for example, right into the D.C. office in Hottel, who might have been the ramrod on this sort of thing. Because I just can't wrap my head around all of this stuff going on with Silas Newton and the stuff that the memo suggests not being somehow related.
I don't disagree. And again, I was surprised to not find Newton's name under there, meaning that he was somehow sourced to all of this. Where I was going before the break with reaching out to the Metropolitan Police Department, and sure, I'm open to it being a different Metro PD, but with DC, if they still have their files or if they've been transferred to some archive somewhere, it would be fascinating to see what did Kurtzman do when he heard this. You know, what did they do at the Metro PD level, but also what did the local field office in DC do? So hopefully the Metro PD did something. I mean, if they hear that part of this squad, do they just automatically go to the FBI? I would lean towards no, but again, that's a possibility. I want to know though, what did they do? Did they investigate the claim? Who is this Air Force investigator that they're referencing? Probably can't figure out the name simply because if he is involved in some kind of crime that got the sex squad involved, I don't mean to laugh about it, but I mean, obviously there are privacy issues that they won't release with that. But maybe it will offer a glimpse into how far, if at all, they went into investigating the claim of what they heard. Because it would just be very hard. Denver PD, DC, it doesn't matter. It would just be very hard for me to believe that they would just hear something about a few flying saucers and aliens, and they go, well, we got to inform the FBI. Again, that it's 1950, so that very well may be true, but I would think that on the Metro PD level, there would be some kind of investigation. I've left a couple messages. I have not heard back. I've been trying to get them to call me back to see if they have any files again over in DC. But yeah, sure, maybe I'll reach out and talk to Denver and, see if there's anything there. But that's what I've been interested in the most.
Kurtzman worked for the Washington, D.C. Metro Police. Is that correct?
So what I read from this is that Kurtzman was the FBI agent that heard it from Carl Howe. So it would be Carl Howe at the Metro PD.
And do they confirm he worked? There was a Carl Howe at the.
No, because I couldn't get anybody to call me back. I would get routed to who I believe would be the person, but it was always a voicemail. So it's kind of a little bit of a challenge in that respect. But no, when I did the video and researched a little bit of Carl Howe, there were some references to some newspaper articles, I believe. But I'll have to look back and see if that tied him to the Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. office, which I believe it did, but I'll double check.
Well, what's interesting about this is here we are talking about this so many years later, but we're able to do some investigative work that seems to provide us with additional information about what was going on. And I had something like that happen, and everybody on the show knows about that, with a guy named Dalton Smith, who we'd never heard of in connection with Roswell. And suddenly his name appears, and it turns out he shared a phone with Jesse Marcel. So he's an intelligence guy, but nobody ever talked to him. And he, of course, died a number of years ago. But we were able to link all that information together through the resources we had. And that's kind of where we are on this one. We don't have the original source of where the information came from. We're looking for that, and that kind of interesting.
And that's at this point, when it comes to this memo, kind of the main focus, because everything else is exhausted on the federal level. So it's a question mark on what did the PD do, if anything, before they turned it over to the feds,
or which PD it really was.
Yeah, and again, I'll double check. I'm pretty sure that the newspaper articles that did reference Carl Howe were in reference to the DC Metropolitan Police, but I'll double check that.
Well, the only thing I'm thinking of is I know that the Denver police would, of course, talk to the FBI if it was necessary for them to talk to the FBI, which would have communicated up the chain of command to Washington, D.C. eventually, if it was something that they needed to know about in Washington, D.C., something that made a more expansive federal interest in that. So there's just kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah,
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your thoughts on NASA moving into UFO investigations and where you thought that might go, and do you have any insight to what's happening with that?
I do a little bit. I mean, I kind of approach it in two different ways. The first part is I'm excited. I mean, I think it's great that they want to look into UFOs and revisit the topic. And, obviously they were involved in the SETI program. I know that that's not UFOs per se, but at least exploring extraterrestrial intelligence. But that was decades ago. So now that they're back in this arena talking about UFOs, very exciting. The problem, though, and this is the negative part of it for me, is they want to be very transparent with the public. And that's great. On the surface, that seems fantastic. From what I understand, the last I've heard, and I've dug into a lot of the email communications, I've gotten literally thousands of pages in the last year from NASA, discovered quite a few different communications. It seems like, the last that I've heard, that most of them will not, most, not all, but most will not have a clearance. They will not be encroaching on classified data. They will not be exploring that avenue at all. In other words, trying to be as transparent as possible. So they have to cut that out if they're going to be doing these public reports. Well, from a scientific standpoint, that bothers me a bit, because even though I'm not demanding to know the classified aspect of this, but rather from a scientific nature, if you are going to explore something, you need to look at all the data, classified or otherwise, in order to make a viable conclusion. So these scientists are exploring this in the right way, with the right intention. But the problem is they are omitting a portion of the data in the process. And they are saying, we're not going to look at that. So what happens in the end? Let's say, I'm jumping the gun here with speculation, but they issue a report. They have statistics. They say XYZ is unexplained, unidentified. We're not sure. But it just could be unexplained because they denied themselves part of the data to call up the Air Force or call up the NRO or call up whomever and say, hey, on such and such date in this general vicinity, we're exploring this, and see if there's some kind of classified angle to it. Because as much as I don't think classified technology and programs explain 100% of UFO cases, I don't believe that, it's still a part of it. So when you omit that data, I think you're tainting the investigation. So excited they're doing it, but I think they're doing it in the wrong way.
Well, are you suggesting they're if they run into a puzzling case and they would call the Air Force or whomever, and they say that was classified, they would drop it, they would push it up to the boundary of classification, or is there just a body of classified information they know is out there, but they're not even going to make queries about what is going on?
From what I understand, that they're not touching that arena at all, not pushing it with a question or anything, because if they don't have clearances and there is a classified test or a classified platform at a certain altitude or whatever, as you know more than I would, those types of pieces of information are classified in itself. So you can't tell somebody without a classification, well, look, we've got something flying up there at 75,000 feet, but we can't tell you anything else. I mean, that confirmation in itself is problematic from a national security standpoint. So if you're talking about scientists who have great intentions but don't have proper clearances, they're not going to be able to ask those questions, and they're not going to be able to hear any viable answers for that reason. Because again, I think that you're going to hit some kind of a wall if they tried to reach out because they have no clearance. That wall will just stop them from getting that proper data. So to that scientist, all of a sudden the statistics become skewed because they are denied that data. They don't have it. So it goes down as an unknown. And I think that is potentially, again, problematic from the standpoint that they're not going to be able to determine true statistics, true breakdowns of what they look at and get a viable end result.
But a lot of the information on UFOs isn't going to be classified. It's going to come from civilian sources, depending on where their investigations go.
It depends, right? And that scope, I don't think is determined yet. I still think that they're trying to outline what the study is. And sure, if they're talking about mostly civilian stuff, that's great. But the same, again, issue arises that if Joe Schmo is out in the backyard and potentially there's some kind of flyover or something to that effect that he wasn't supposed to see. And again, I know that's kind of a silly example, but the information that Joe Schmo conveys, absolutely, they can hear all that. It's not classified. But determining the origin of what Joe saw, that potentially can encroach on a classified arena. Or if a pilot comes forward, sees something off the coast of California close to a naval base, or naval air station, and they're testing something. NASA sees it on their instrumentation, can confirm it's there, talks to firsthand witnesses that nothing is classified. But if it does go into that classified platform arena that they can't confirm, then that's problematic. So I think that in that regard, that's setting NASA out differently than, let's say, the DoD effort, where the DoD effort is quite the opposite. They are operating on heavy classifications up to mostly secret and top secret based on their classification guide. They're essentially classifying everything from the creation of UAP information. So a report, photograph, video.
I've got to take a break, John. I've
Sure.
got to take a break, running a little bit long here. Once again, it's www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And for John, it would be www.theblackvault.com. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. And I'm here with John Greenewald. We're talking about NASA's investigation into UFOs, or UAPs as they prefer to call them, I suppose. The question that springs to my mind is, we're going to have parallel investigations running from NASA, the DoD, and whomever else is involved. And if NASA came up to a question, the DoD guys might have investigated it and they could say, well, we have an explanation. We just can't tell you about it right now. And that would, I think, I'm not sure that would be a bad thing to have happen. I mean, if you've got the parallel investigations. So
you're assuming they'll communicate, though.
Pardon me?
You're assuming they'll communicate or communicate properly. You know, and that's really where the challenge comes in, is that you would think, like, logic would tell us there should be no problem with parallel investigations. But sadly, you've got, with these parallel investigations, one shrouded in intense and immense secrecy, while the other one is trying to stay transparent, but in that process is denying themselves data. So who are you going to hear from? Likely NASA. And what you hear from NASA, we have to then hope and trust that they are behind the scenes talking to the DoD. And I'm not convinced that they would cross that line, not NASA, but the DoD, because they have clamped down on this topic incredibly hard. And a lot of people think we're in this era of transparency, road to disclosure. In my opinion, it's quite the opposite, where they are grabbing a hold of this, the DoD, the military side of this, grabbing a hold of the topic and not wanting to tell the public anything when it comes to the actual facts of what's going on.
Well, that leads to the next question, which is, you don't seem to be excited about the DoD investigation into UFOs and how they're going to proceed from that, even with the mandate that has come down from Congress of what they're supposed to do.
You know, ironically, I think I'm probably more excited about the DoD investigation because it gives me paper trails to go after. And I see that as a challenge to where NASA, if they're not going to the classified realm, which is fine, despite my concerns about the scientific side of it, there's really not a whole lot of paper trails to go after to see what they're not telling us. Because if NASA adheres to what they said, they'll be transparent. DoD, on the other hand, that's a whole different story. So they'll have these public reports, but behind the scenes, they're going to be doing a lot more classified work. And that doesn't mean that just because it's classified, it's going to stay hidden. The classified UAP report that I got partially declassified is a prime example of that, where the public got a 9-page, kind of a dull report last year, June of 2021. And then Congress got a 17-page classified version. No one saw that. So I had filed a case to get that declassified and was successful in getting it partially released. It revealed a little bit more to the story. It revealed what data they were kind of playing with and looking at. It revealed that even the shapes of UAP, they didn't want to tell us. So even though that was a redaction and not a reveal in the true sense of the word, it showed us something anyway. So those types of paper trails I live for. And to go back to your question, yeah, I would say that I'm probably more excited about the DoD thing because I do see it as a challenge. And I believe that there will be much more that they're going to hide. But I think that if myself, and I know a lot of other researchers are out there, are going for the actual information, we may be able to get stuff through FOIA, may take a little bit of time, that will reveal more than any type of public, quote unquote, transparency driven report that they willingly give out.
Well, the question springs to mind immediately, is there any evidence that there's going to be any kind of a liaison between NASA and the DoD? I mean, some guy responsible for talking to the DoD, or is that just something that has not come up in the discussions?
I haven't seen it. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. I'm not aware of it. I can say prior to NASA's effort, one discovery that was made through FOIA, which I found really fascinating, was going back a couple of years ago, approximately, I think 2019 off the top of my head. But the UAP task force had reached out to NASA, and they wanted to brief them in a classified setting about the current state of UAP and potentially how I think NASA could contribute to the effort. Who they requested to be there, the UAP task force asked for the director of the International Space Station to be part of that briefing. So it was interesting in the sense that the task force and then even this new effort really has kind of gone out of their way to say that they were focusing on sightings that were in and around training ranges. But when they start reaching out to NASA and going to the space station director, they likely are going a little bit higher than those training ranges. I understand the space station has instrumentation that may help. I would, again, argue that the DoD probably has some better instrumentation with some of those other satellites that we know about and even don't know about, that they can get and collect some of the same type of data. So it was an interesting revelation. So fast forward to now, is there a liaison? Are they communicating? I hope so. Again, it's one of those logical things that you would think would happen, but logic sometimes doesn't really come into play when it comes to government programs.
When I was looking at some of that documentation, what struck me is the DoD research was going to be limited to military observations, military pilots, military personnel, which sets up a whole different, categorization of how we're going to investigate this thing. It didn't look like if there was a civilian involved in a UFO report, they were going to be bothered or worried about investigating it. They were going to concentrate mainly on the military, which suggested to me an attempt to keep an awful lot of this stuff in the back closet.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no evidence that they'll care about anything outside of the military. And again, they've said so many times that the focus on these military ranges and training exercises. So, again, we can get into the same type of points that I just went over of the data that you're limiting yourself. If there's other types of cases that may play into what they're currently investigating, why not look at that? But according to them, they don't care. It's just military only in and around training ranges and exercises.
There was some discussion that I saw not long ago that the incursions into the training ranges was drones as opposed to anything extraterrestrial. Might have been Chinese, might have been Russian, that sort of thing. Have you found anything like that, or is that an ongoing part of the investigation?
Well, I think drones are definitely going to be a part of this conversation, whether true UFO believers want to believe that or not. And the case in point is that the information that's coming out from the Navy right now really does lean towards these, drones, quadcopter types incursions. And one was just revealed in the last couple of days by the Drive at the Drive's Warzone website. And they do a lot of writing about this type of stuff, and they did a great job. But these drone swarms that so many people are talking about, as more information comes out, it literally looks like they're drones, where drone swarms became more of a nickname, but they felt it was UAP related, a true unknown UFO phenomenon. The information is now kind of showing, well, it's drones. And another quick point is a UAP, a labeled UAP in U.S. Navy files that I got released. They ended up putting it in their online reading room under a UAP folder. It's a quadcopter drone taken in daylight. There's no doubt about the fact that this is a drone, and yet the Navy has it labeled as a UAP. And so the question mark then becomes, what percentage of these encounters, encroachments are done by these types of technology, either military, foreign, state-driven, or just some curious person going out and flying into a place that they shouldn't? And I have data on that as well through FOIA. NCIS investigated drone incursions on Navy bases by civilians. So it's a problem, and it's part of the conversation. How much of the conversation, we still don't know. We have no idea what percentage.
And I don't know how much you know about that, because you remember the flap over Colorado and Wyoming a couple of years ago that seemed to be drones. I think that was the eventual explanation, was it was drones. It's the same sort of thing that we're talking about here.
Right, just probably with a much more sinister agenda, meaning that if it is a foreign power that's flying this, is it China off the coast of California, these cases in 2019, that's obviously a national security concern that we have to look at. In the same regard, I mean, and this is where my skeptic hat comes into play, you're not too far from a Navy testing center out there off the coast of California. And all of these incursions and these encroachments and these problems that people are talking about, usually always happen during a training exercise. So, what's the plausible explanation for those specific cases? Are we talking about that this is maybe, again, some classified platforms that are being tested against the most powerful Navy in the world, by us? And I've asked the Pentagon straight out, would they do that? Would you withhold information from the Navy and, let's say, allow the Air Force in what they considered a safe environment to test a observation platform, a surveillance drone, something like that? And they told me no. So they kind of had an out with that question, and they said that they wouldn't do it. That doesn't necessarily mean they still wouldn't do it, but it's always been a question mark for me. Why is it always during training exercises? Is it just because the instrumentation is there, it's turned on, and it's searching? Maybe. Is it an observation bias? Maybe. It's one of those question marks. I'm not really sure. But the last thing I want to say about that, because I always get a lot of heat by bringing up those possibilities, it still doesn't mean that these phenomena, the multiple facets of it, are all explained by classified platforms and pieces of technology. But we have to accept it's part of the conversation, and we have to accept that it probably is the answer to some of these incursions. How much of it, though, is the question mark, and that's what really intrigues me to try and figure it out.
Well, we're going to be back right after this with John Greenewald talking about UAPs and government investigations and UFOs. And the blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And we will be back right after this. So please stick around. And we are back. I'm here with John Greenewald. His book, of course, is cleverly called Inside the Black Vault, the Government's UFO Secrets Revealed. His website is www.theblackvault.com. I don't know why I had to look at the piece of paper to figure that out. We've been talking about the government's investigation of UAPs, the NASA investigation and the DOD investigation, and the coordination there and the possibility of explanations. I had mentioned the incursions over parts of Colorado and I guess western Nebraska, eastern Wyoming a number of years ago. But this would have been missile silos and strategic forces that they might have been looking at. I was just wondering if your idea that it might be something nefarious would apply that, because we're getting pretty far inland for, I guess, somebody with a drone, but a government with a drone can pretty well send it anywhere they want it to go.
Yeah, I shied away from really digging into that case, but I would lean less away from some type of foreign power that was, in Colorado or that particular area. My references were more to the ones off the coast of California, a lot through 2019, where 1, 2, 3 drone-like craft, they put them in the logbook as UASs, or unmanned aerial systems, essentially a drone, that were shadowing our naval vessels. So those are the ones that I think that, you're really getting into a high probability of either a foreign power surveilling us or some type of military pieces of testing equipment.
Well, you touched briefly, and then we've got just a little bit of time left, touch briefly on disclosure. Mm-hmm. And is it your opinion that we are moving closer to disclosure now? The government's going to come out and tell us really what's going on, or are they going to continue the path they followed for 75 years, denying everything?
I think, assuming that you mean disclosure, like revealing some kind of other presence here, which is what most people think we're on the path on, I don't see that happening at all. Again, from my vantage point as somebody who's filed FOIAs for 26 years and has watched this secrecy, it has only strengthened in the last couple of years. I know that we're hearing about UAP more. I know there's legislation. I know all of that sounds fun, and it is. I mean, it creates amazing paper trails that I can go after. But the secrecy, when it comes down to it, has strengthened. They have a security classification guide that prior to 2019, they never had before. And I know you know this, Kevin, but these guides essentially mandate secrecy on a specific topic, in this case UAP. So they're writing manuals on how to keep this stuff secret and what they can't say, and it automatically goes in at the secret level, if not top secret, depending upon instrumentation involved. So you have a huge challenge to try and unravel this mystery. So disclosure, no, I don't think we're on the road to that. I love the fact that we're seeing more conversation about it, but there's still a lot of challenges. I'll make this last point quick. What a lot of people don't want to look at is that when Congress is asking tough questions, and some of them are, let's say in this recent UAP hearing, they will get some answers, but some will be met with, well, we can talk about that in a classified setting. Did one senator or congressman or whomever fight back on any of that? No, because they're cleared to hear it, so they don't care. So what is going to be secret will remain secret, and it will not be secret just because some senator or congressman asks. They are perfectly accepting of that secrecy as well. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. What a politician says they want when it comes to transparency is one thing, but that hearing was a prime example. All they had to say was, we need to talk about that in a closed session. And they're like, yeah, okay, no problem. I mean, so that's not really a push for transparency by Congress. So it's great they're asking the questions, but there's still a layer of secrecy we can't break through.
What surprised me in that was most of the people in the hearing didn't have a clue as to what UAPs or UFOs were all about, with one exception. And he asked about the Belt, Montana, Maelstrom Air Force Base events of 1967. And they said, well, we don't know about that. We haven't touched on that. And then one of the guys finally said, well, yes, we did briefly. I know a little bit about it, but that came under the heading of national security. And they diverted it that way by pleading ignorance, I suppose. But I did notice the same thing you said, that, well, we'll get to that in the closed session that was coming up here this afternoon.
Yeah. And none of them fought it, and again, they can scream transparency all day long, and we want the public to have answers. But when push comes to shove and the DOD says, we can't tell you, they were fine with it, because they're going to find out no matter what. They go behind closed sessions, they learn whatever it is, then come out, and then what has happened? And there's been now a couple of years of verified, classified briefings going on for Congress and the Senate, and nothing has really happened where they've come out and went, hey, look, I'm going to reveal something here that the public should know. Nobody's doing that, so I don't see that changing.
I noticed that there were a number of points where they were setting deadlines. You must do such and such by this date, and almost all the deadlines have passed without anything being done. We're still talking about it. They did meet the June 25th deadline, but then they said we'll be doing another report in 90 days, and that would have been last October. And here we are, nearly in October of this year, and we've got nothing new.
Keep in mind that could be a classified report, though. And I've pushed on that, and I've got an open case for that. So if they did meet the deadline, it may have stayed in the classified realm, and it was not for the general public. Because as far as I know, the language never stipulated for the report you're talking about as a public report. That rather it was just to be for Congress, so they could have done another classified 10, 20 pager, and that satisfied Congress. So that's still a possibility.
That's an interesting point, because I hadn't thought about them doing something classified and not announcing it. But shouldn't they have announced it? Well, we got the report, and of course that's revealing the report exists. But the same thing, we met the deadline. So
again, you would think, and that's a very logical way to think about it, but you never know. You really honestly never know what they want to reveal to the public, what they don't want to reveal. And this is the result of 70 plus years of just crud that we've all had to go through to try and figure out what the ultimate truth is. That when it comes down to it, here in 2022, we have no idea who to believe, and congressional mandates and dates being set and legislative language and all that stuff at the end of the day doesn't mean anything, because we still, as the general public, don't trust them. From the politicians to the Pentagon, it doesn't matter. And that's the challenge, but that's the result of 70 plus years of that we've had to wade through.
Well, I would say, not wanting to get too political, but I don't think the government has done much in the last few years to, or the DOD to gain our trust.
No.
What we've seen going on. I know in the UFO field, they would say things like, well, we have no classified documents. And the next thing you know, some years down the road, a classified document has been declassified and we have our hands on it. And we can see what they were doing and what they were saying behind those closed doors. And I think some of the reports written early on, and I've made this point before, the people writing it thought that it would never see the light of day. So they were quite revealing in some of those documentation about what was going on. I think they're now clever about what they're going to put in writing, what they're going to communicate through email, and what they're going to communicate verbally in a closed door session.
That's why I love the old stuff, because it was pre-FOIA and it was more real, For me, it was more honest. Nowadays, you never know if they're drafting something. And to go back to your other point, though, I wanted to make this really quick. There's no repercussion for their lies or their myths, truths that they're being given out. They tell you, no, sorry, Kevin, we got nothing on this. And like you said, they find a classified document 12 years from now. What happens? They don't get in trouble, even though they're not following the true letter of the law. It doesn't matter. And that's what's so frustrating.
Well, I'll point to Moondust is to make your point where Senator Jeff Migeman from New Mexico queried the Air Force about Moondust, and the answer was there's no such thing. And the next thing you know, well, here's these documents labeled Moondust. I said, well, yeah, that program did exist, but we've never deployed it. And then you find the documents where it was deployed. I think you were probably responsible for finding some of those, as were Robert Todd, documents showing that Moondust was deployed at times. I've learned a little bit more about Moondust. For those of you interested, I got a book that's out called Project Moondust. It's updated. So there was no Project Moondust per se. There was a Moondust classification, and project officers were appointed when they needed them to conduct an investigation, which is a clever way of moving around, I suppose. John, we're out of time.
It always goes so fast with you, Kevin.
Yes, I know. I've enjoyed the discussion. I think we've learned a lot about what's going on. I'll keep you on the list of people to call.
Please do. I'm always there for you. I appreciate the invitation.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Once again, his book was, I'm going to look at it again, Inside the Black Vault. The website is www.theblackvault.com. You can take a look at his website to follow up on some of the things we've discussed today. I was going to say, well, you can go to mine, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and there's other discussions. You can learn more about the Hottel memo there that we talked about at the beginning of the program. You can learn more about my thoughts on NASA moving into the UFO arena and what that tells us about what's going on, and some of the thoughts about that public hearing that was held not long ago. I think it lasted 81 minutes for those of you interested in that sort of thing. And all of that can be found and accessed to the blog. Next week, thanks to Tucker Carlson, I'm going to be talking about cattle mutilations. It's something, a topic that I thought would have been dismissed a long time ago because there really is no evidence of alien involvement in the cattle mutilations. I think it's more natural phenomena, but we'll look at my investigations of it beginning in the mid-1970s and moving into today's arena. Following up, at the end of September, I'm going to have on Chris O'Brien, who is at the other side of the coin, at the far end of the perspective, I suppose, with his take on what the cattle mutilations are and how they're related to the UFO phenomenon. And following next week's program, I'll have on Tom Carey again, and we're going to talk a little bit more about his investigations into UFOs and things like that, for those of you who wanted more information. Thank you for tuning in. I will be back in 167 hours with another discussion of UFOs in some realm, that sort of thing. So again, thanks for listening.